afternoon, everyone. My name is Federico Facca, and I'm the coordinator of H-Cloud CSA, working for the unit in the Commission in support of cloud and service research and policies. And before our presentation, I welcome Alexandra Paul, an economist from the unit on cloud computing from the Commission, to provide a brief introduction to the point of view of the Commission on the cloud role in the policy agenda of the Commission that was lately very active.
Thanks a lot, Federico. So I will be sharing my screen now. Let me know if you can see it, please, before I can start. Okay, so you can hear me. So thank you very much to everybody to be here. So as Federico was saying, I am Alexandra Paul. I'm working as Chief Economist in the Cloud and Software Unit that is also responsible for coordinating the Edge Cloud project that you are already today present for. So first of all, thanks again for making the time to be with us and to brainstorm and share your thought with us, and especially with the Edge Cloud team. And thanks for the Edge Cloud team to have put in place this webinar today. This is much appreciated. So what I'm going to do is going to give you a brief overview of what we have been trying to achieve with cloud computing, mainly in the European data strategy, but I will also touch on the industrial strategy for the EU that was also released in May 2020. Now, and I will try to do three things very briefly. One, to explain you the rationale behind the different cloud components in the European data strategy. Second, trying to let you know what we are trying to do and achieve with our proposal there on European data strategy regarding cloud. And finally, telling you how we are thinking about delivering our ambition for the coming years by the actions we want to put in place, but also by the different financial instrument tools that we will have. So we're starting by actually doing more what I would say landscape analysis when we started looking at the cloud dimension to be put in the data strategy. And our first departing point was to see, as you have read the strategy as well, that we are in a new situation where we have an explosion of data volume that they are flowing across Europe, but also in the world. So basically, between 2018 and 2025, we will have a kind of 4 times more data that will be flowing across the world. This will be from 33 zettabytes to around 175 zettabytes that is forecasted by 2025. In addition to that, we also see that there is an explosion of the number of connected devices that will be across the world. So by 2025 as well, we are forecasting to have more than 500 billion devices connected. So that data volume, if I can say, explosion and this proliferation of connected device has actually created a new data opportunity for the computing industry. So one of them is, of course, all this volume of data will have to be stored and hosted somewhere. So what we say, this large pool of data will be stored in these new common data spaces. And at the same time, we will also have an expanding need to actually be able to process very rapidly the different data that they are proliferating at the edge of the network in edge computing. So that is really what we can see, that new opportunity that is increasing in terms of data for the computing industry. But this will have to be developed. I would say this opportunity will have to be seized only if we're able to, on one side, close the investment gap that has been seen in the latest, if you read it, the recovery plan, where we estimated that more than 11 billion euro per year of investment gap from the industry, from the computing industry is existing to be able to actually have a market, if I can say, a supply in the market that will be more dynamic, more diversified, to be able to seize that opportunity. But this will also be the first challenge that the computing industry will have to, I would say, to cope with to say this opportunity. And the second one will be really to be able to have this new demand, this new supply that will adapt to the new demand needs that we see actually in Europe from public and private users. And more specifically, we see that there is new type of services in cloud computing that they are requested by the different private and public users, that they are actually on one side need to be greener. As you know that the ICT or the CO2 emission from the cloud computing industry is the highest one from the ICT sector, but also that we'll have to have services that they are ultra secured, especially because there is the rise of third country foreign laws that impose new restriction on third country providers that will have to also be taken into account. And thirdly, we'll really this need to again be able to balance between the different services that will be at the edge and centrally available across Europe with a very low latency rates and be accessible equally across all the European countries. So based on this landscape and seeing the new data opportunity that exists for the computing industry, there were kind of a need to trigger a public intervention at the European level, actually to try to emulate the transformation of the cloud ecosystem to say that data opportunity. And when I say emulate the transformation of the cloud ecosystem, is important to see it in two sides. So on one side, how we will be able to foster the computing supply across Europe to transform to set this data opportunity, and on the other side as well to be able to, of course, stimulate and respond to these new computing demand needs based on our EU core values. So when you read the strategy, what you can see from a computing perspective is, so on one side, how we are planning to foster the computing supply. We are thinking about trying to federate the different cloud infrastructures that exist across Europe from the provider of cloud services. This to bring, to give them more scale, to also bring them their IT cost down as well, thanks to cloud computing, and be able to scale up beyond their national markets and really seize the opportunity of the European internal market. At the same time, what we are trying to also do, so not just to act on the infrastructure level, but also trying to see how we can design cutting edge new services for the European needs, that they are actually more competitive, what I was saying, more secure, more energy efficient, distributed as well to respond to the new needs of the different users. And this will be, of course, also enabled by the setup of different marketplaces at the European level, where the different services that would be developed could be then offered on these marketplaces. That will be really our two I can say key action we would like to foster through different investment with the Connect Europe Facility 2 and also with the Digital European Program to really develop this cloud federation across Europe from infrastructure to services, and to ultimately make the EU really a new hub for data processing activity in which we can trust, and that really could build a new competitive advantage for Europe in computing in the coming years. The second lever that we are trying to push is really to see what I was saying, how we can stimulate this computing demand, given that the demand is changing, but also we are also departing from a situation where the cloud uptake is rather fragmented across Europe between different member states. So it can go to below 10% to up to 50% when you look at the different member states, but also where actually you have a few kind of, I would say, companies, only 1 in 5 startup and 1 in 4 bigger companies that are using cloud across Europe. So there is really a need to try to stimulate the computing demand by responding to the new need of the users. And so the same, on one side, we would like to also offer them the possibility, if that's is something that can be useful for them for their own business activity, to either connect their different own data infrastructure, or as well in the same time trying to offer them a possibility to have a more transparent and equal access to the different services they could buy from cloud to edge across Europe. And this again will have to be done by a different type of action that will be put in place, such as the development of a new rule book across Europe with a different condition that different provider will have to commit or to adhere with if they would like to offer different services across Europe, for instance. But also the necessity to also foster, for example, the different cloud uptake, what I was saying, by federating the infrastructure also of public entities that will be able to deliver more swiftly the different services of general interest that they usually provide to citizens and businesses, by notably also trying to foster this cloud uptake via different memorandum of understanding for different public administration across Europe. So this will be also the second level where we would like to act to really try to stimulate that computing demand. And what I was saying, by responding to the new needs, so really by trying to offer them a wider business portfolio of cloud services that will go not only to cloud to edge, but also any more enable, I would say, cloud-based services with added value, such as HPC as a service, or for instance, any AI services that can be run on the top. So that will also be offered into the different marketplaces. And finally, this is a transversal one into the cloud ecosystem, but is really important for the transformation and really that they can seize the data opportunity, is that the cloud federation and the different infrastructure that will be interconnected and services will be offered, they will actually be the foundation to facilitate the hosting, storage, and processing of the data that they are available in the different data spaces across Europe. And this will be fundamental actually to also be able to have these different services provided in Europe to be able to ensure that the data exchange access are secure and that they are adhering to the different EU values. And of course, when you are working on this type of data spaces and you see the different actors that will be involved, whether from a user perspective or provider of the infrastructure or the different services, you will also be creating very vivid new type of computing and data ecosystem that will ensure to have cross-fertilization and co-creation for a product and service innovation across Europe. So that has been translating really concretely. Now it was to give you the landscape and so what I was saying, why we do that, the rationale and what we want to achieve. It has been materializing in 6 very concrete action under the data strategy. And what you see with a very, I would say, short timeline, very strict timeline in the 2 coming years, with a variety of action that some of them, as you can see here, I have discussed them already, but they are more whether on the side of stimulating the demand for cloud or the uptake, like the memorandum of understanding, for instance, or even the development of the European Cloud Rulebook that will support the access and equal access and processing of cloud and edge services across Europe by different private and public entities, but also others that will also look more at the fostering the supply side, such as the high impact projects that will be put in place on cloud federation and also data spaces, where we will really try to stimulate the supply side, what I was saying, from the infrastructure as a service to the software as a service, as well as, for instance, the development of the Industrial Cloud Alliance that will also stimulate the purpose of achieving this high impact project. And as well, to say that there are opportunities that will not be possible or feasible if actually we were not able to also seize the value creation or the economic value from the different data that are flowing across Europe. Because the volume of data is so big today that the value of this data and the flows of this data is also important to understand, to see how we can maximize that as well to create economic value as well in the coming years. So that's also a more transversal measure, but that is also critical when you see the explosion of the data across Europe and the flow of those data. So to deliver on this action and on this different, on these different 5 to 6 action. We are of course planning to have some co-investment, and this co-investment is on one side up to 2 billion that could come from the European Commission. Actually, this will be through different channels, as you have heard about the Digital European Program that is about building different capabilities for services. So the part of new services to be designed from cloud to edge, for instance, and also from the Connected Europe facility that is about looking at how we can federate and interconnect the different infrastructure across Europe, and bringing also a very rapid connectivity as well among this infrastructure. That will be two of the main channels we will be using, but we will also be using other type of channel like InvestEU, that there are some, I would say, equity and loans that could also be lent to a small startup or even big company that would have interest as well to be part of this project, but would not have the collateral to be part of it. And as well, we will also, of course, drag into what I was saying, draw into the new recovery package that has been developed in May, so in the last month, basically, to see how some of the investment that we would like to propose and see the transformation in the different member states and the different, I would say, economic markets could also be taking place through the recovery plan of the different member states that will be submitting them. So that will be, as I would say, from the EU side, what we could propose in terms of co-financing. What we say is up to 2 billion. Of course, it will depend on the result of the financial negotiation that should happen by the end of this year for this up to 2 billion. But this will have to be, as we say, co-financing. So it will have to be complemented by investment as well from the member state and the industry. And that's vital because we're expecting to have at least the same amount, so up to 2 billion, and with then a leverage effect that we could go until 6 billion in total. But what is more important is to say that co-investment is the key, because if we believe that this will work, this is going to be Cloud Federation, competitive federation of cloud infrastructure as services that will be put across Europe, then this will have to be also financed and invested by the different industrial players that will have actually the return on investment, the first one to benefit from that. So I think here I'm going to stop to say that, just to let you know that we still have the Connected Europe Facility 2 program that is open. So the part on interconnection for any kind of feedback that you would have on this. So please come back, reach out if you have any needs. And we also have the European Data Flow Mapping survey. That's the voluntary survey where we are working on mapping the different flows of data between different cloud infrastructure across Europe, and where basically the collaboration from the industry is also vital for that. So I also encourage you, if you find the time, to also input into that. So thank you very much, and I am happy to take any question if needed.
Okay, thank you very much, Alexandra. Federico, are you back with us? We have had some internet problems.
Yeah, I think my internet is
CEF2.
My internet looks back, so I'm trying to.
Okay, if you could
screen sharing again. And yeah, let's see.
And Alexandra, will you be available a little bit later in case there are questions from our attendees? Would you be prepared to answer some questions?
Yeah, sure. I was even saying if you need me to respond to some of them now, is also possible.
If there's anyone with a burning question for Alexandra, perhaps you could raise your hand using the participant window in Zoom.
Okay.
I see a Sophia Trenor. Let's just do a couple of questions. Yes. Go ahead, please. Sophia?
You should unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay,
yes.
Sorry, it's Sophia from Amazon Web Services. Thank you for the presentation. I was wondering whether you can add a bit of color on the marketplace. Do you have in mind replicating a bit what they did in the UK with the G Cloud? I mean, it's not very clear to me what it means and what it entails. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophia. Can you hear me? or not?
Yes, thank
Yes.
you.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah. So you are right. The direction is to go via the marketplaces, as what it was developed in G Cloud, especially. But it will have been, if I can say, has a bit more flavor than that, in the sense that it will of course have to be European marketplaces to be put in place. And what was done in the UK was mainly for easing the purchasing of cloud services for public entities via common framework contract, actually. Here, what we would like to make sure is also that startup and other companies can also see the different products that exist and can also buy them online, basically, with different transparent rules that will be applying, that we would also be able to scroll down. So for example, imagine any energy efficiency criteria that could be put in place, or any type of characteristic of the product will be highlighted, I think, in more detail than what you see in G Cloud. And of course, what we would like to see is European marketplaces, so not just what I was saying for one type of actors, but that can serve really the purpose of stimulating the cloud uptake for all different sectors of the economy. And actually to ease that access and use of cloud services in that type of different marketplaces. So and then of course we will also would like to see how we can make that as I would say as vendor neutral as possible as well, when we are going to develop that marketplaces.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Mark,
well, Federico, before we, shall we read Thomas's question and then we'll move on to your presentation? I'll just.
I wanted to exactly mention that.
Go ahead, Federico.
Yeah, there is a question in the chat by Thomas asking about upcoming calls related to cloud in the as part of the ICT program.
Yes, sure. Sorry, because I am not okay. I think I don't see it. So Thomas, where is from? Sorry, just to know as well from who is asking the questions. From which organization?
It's not in the name, so maybe you should either type or speak up.
Yeah, Thomas, just for curiosity, if you can let us know from where you are, where country, not country, which company you are working on, this will be great. Yes, sure. So for the different calls, so we will aim to have the first call by the end of the year already in Q4 2020. Few calls will already be open, and then the other one will be most of the calls starting to be open in 2021 in Q1 or Q2. So that's the way. And so there will be some calls, as I was saying, from the Digital European Program, and other calls that will be related to Connected Europe facility. So really large-scale deployment project, whether in building capacity across Europe for the infrastructure side, but also to try what I was saying, to develop different pan-European cloud-to-edge services as well across Europe to be used as well with the Digital European Program.
Okay, I see there is, thanks a lot, Alexandra. I see there are no other hands raised or question in the chat. So I think we can start with the presentation from the project. I will try to be short, so we leave as much as possible space for the people to intervene and talk. So very shortly, what is H-Cloud? H-Cloud is a CSA. So as you know, CSAs are a type of projects which aim is to support specific community and specific units inside the Commission to gather inputs from the community to understand the next steps in terms of research and innovation in the agenda of the work programs, but as well in policies and related aspects. We have been, of course, we started this year, we have been engaging with the Commission around different discussion, and the focus areas that are in this moment central to the future work programs are federated clouds and edge computing and green computing. These are then, of course, the thing we are largely focused on our work. and the plan is, of course, is also to as a way to gather and summarize what the community thinks of priorities and so on for the future of Europe, to also transfer this into recommendation that might be taken up in the future work program, in particular Horizon Europe, Connecting Europe Facility 2 and Digital Europe. We are working now on a new version of a green paper, collecting some of the strategic outcomes, and we will inform you when this new version that is current under preparation will be released. For us, as I was mentioning, it's very important to gather all the input the stakeholder will provide us to elaborate on this common vision for the from the community to support the future of direction of cloud computing in Europe. To this aim, of course, you can provide your comments and input today in the chat or by raising your hand, as Mark meant. We have also a running survey that was also mentioned in the invitation email, so you can, it would be great if you can put your view also contribute in there, or of course you can email us and we will come back to you. Very quickly, what we will cover in the presentation, basically our analysis of high-level analysis of also what Alexandra presented, and a bit of our insights in the current status of the cloud solution and how this might evolve to support the strategy of the and the vision of the Commission, and what is the role of cloud computing industry into that. And then space for having your feedback on some key question in relation to that. So going quickly to an overview, if you have been following up the different documents that were lately released by the Commission, starting from late 2019, you will know that the new agenda of the Commission is driven by 6 priorities. The first one, which was at the center of the new commissioner candidature speech, is the European Green Deal. So the overall aim of becoming the first world climate neutral continent by 2050. And of course, this is also, as Alexandra was mentioning, there is a clear role of digital technology and cloud computing into achieving this. Another important aspect is an economy which is designed for the value of European people, so taking into account fairness, aiming at reducing poverty and inequality. And these are also linked with the policy, the priority of somehow supporting the transition of Europe toward a digital economy. And in this sense, of course, the aim of the Commission is to reinforce the action that were already taken toward in the digital single market strategy in the previous year. The other 3 elements are supporting and promoting the European way of life, which means all this set of core values that Europe is trying to put at the center of all its vision, spanning from tolerance, equality, social fairness, protection of individual rights, also in terms of data privacy, and so on. Of course, all these action needs also to being able to support the position of Europe in the world, in not only from the economical point of view, but also from the point of view of making sure that the values that Europe is pushing are becoming a reference also for other countries. So this applies, of course, to issues related to environmental protection, labor protection, and social and civil rights. And this is also, of course, linked to the renewing the role of European citizen in the democratic process within Europe. Okay, yeah, you have for sure also seen that these priorities are starting from a number of documents that were rolled out starting in February and also followed up in March. And now there are a number of strategic communication that tries to define how these key political priorities should be implemented, at least from a policy perspective, of course, leaving them to the market, the concrete implementation. And some of them are, of course, very linked to digital economy and to cloud computing. So, for example, the digital education plan to increase the skills of European citizens in the digital technologies, the action plan for 5G and 6G, the European data strategy and the industrial strategy that we already mentioned, Data Act, new rules for the digital market, and so on and so forth. In this context, of course, as the webinar title suggests, the two starting elements are the data strategy and the industrial strategy. I don't want to spend much time on this. Of course, you can find all of this information in the strategy per se, but clearly, I mean, as Alexandra evidenced before, there are a number of challenges that are somehow blocking the establishing of a data economy, but also provide a potential for that. And these are well discussed in the data strategy communication. And within that data strategy communication, you will find actually that the vision of the Commission is to have an high impact project to support the unleashing of the data economy in Europe. And this is composed of two main actions. One is the implementation of data spaces, and one is the implementation of federated cloud infrastructure. And of course, they are highly interrelated, given that to create a wide and distributed data space, cloud infrastructure are a central element. And there are a number of planned actions that are linked to these different projects So from the point of view of the industrial strategy, there are 3 key pillars that the strategy want to focus on. One is reinforcing the European competitive role at a global level, and to make this happen, basically supporting more and more the establishment of the European single market, because of course players have easy access to a large internal market, are easier than to scale up globally. Another key aspect is the transition toward climate neutrality, which is, of course, linked to the Green Deal, and the investment and effort toward digitalization, which means in some areas supporting the take-up of digital technologies, but also investing on making available a set of core digital infrastructure in Europe. Also in this case, there are different actions that are interrelated to this industrial strategy. Some are very relevant in terms of digital industry and cloud industry, and this, for example, regards also the digitalization efforts inside the SME strategy and the investment on supporting skills in there and development of digital skills in there. The action plan for reinforcing the digital single market and so on. It is clear that also this strategy, the data strategy and the industrial strategy are heavily interlinked. In fact, the data spaces inside the industrial strategy are clearly mentioned as a way to not only increase the digitalization of industry, but also the capacity to innovate and support the creation of a digital single market in Europe. There is another important point, and this of course relates to the Green Deal, is that while supporting the economic expansion and that digital infrastructure can produce, it is also important that this happens taking into account the social principle and in particular the climate neutrality goals. And in relation to this also there is quite a number of actions aimed at reducing the environmental impact of electronics. And the other important action that you see listed in the industrial strategy is the investment on digital education, and all these actions are clearly linked also to the new way, the new instruments that the Commission is foreseeing to support the digital and innovation and deployment in Europe. So for sure you know already that there is a new instrument which is planned, which is called Digital Europe, and somehow its main one of its main role is also to support the transition of mature solution coming from research and experimentation toward the market penetration. And in particular, Digital Europe plays a key role in support both of the European Cloud Federation and in support of the data spaces, but also in support of the digital skills development, given that digital innovation hubs are in the current plan, one of the key elements, part of the upcoming Digital Europe program. I'm now giving space to Mark.
Okay. First, thank you very much, Federico. Let's move to the next slide. We've heard a lot of very high-level discussions, and in terms of the strategies from the EC, very important strategies and actions that are planned. So what we want to do in this webinar is to explore what those strategies mean for practical technologies, practical actions that may be taken in different areas. And we're in particular looking for the advice and input of this group here on the phone, here on the webinar, on the phone. I'm so old-fashioned. And I look forward to your questions, comments, and I would also strongly encourage you, if you can take a little bit of time to look at our survey where we ask some more specific questions. It is a little bit of a long survey. It'll take you probably about 10 or 15 minutes to do, but I think your input there on some specific questions would be extremely useful. So let's talk about Cloud Federation. A couple of points. It means a lot of things. We have traditionally thought about it as the federation, the joining together of infrastructure. This is an example. I'm with EGI, which obviously has been doing this for a while in the research and science space. And it's now expanding to a broader concept called the European Open Science Cloud. And I think this highlights what could be done more broadly across industry as we move from cloud infrastructure to potentially data infrastructure, software infrastructure, et cetera, and to bring those pieces together. There's clearly great value in the ability to bring data spaces together, to create a data space through federation and other technologies. And there are also abilities to link that with the underlying capabilities. When we get to the data, we see the true value. Next slide, please. So let's talk about federation in particular. As an organizational forum, it is a mechanism for building trust around shared goals. And this is something that allows different organizations from different walks of life to work together to meet those shared goals. It's not just an industry alliance. It involves other people to share them. And just a quick reminder, if everybody could continue to keep muted. There's somebody, I'm going to mute this person. Sorry. Okay. And it also creates a forum for collective agreement around important technical standards. So these should not be developed in a vacuum. They should be developed with the consultation of the organizations that need to comply with them. And this applies not only technically, but also organizationally, governance, security, et cetera. It gives you a mechanism for aligning goals and objectives across multiple stakeholder groups. In other words, this is not just, for example, cloud providers agreeing amongst themselves. It's an opportunity to incorporate the needs of users, SMEs, innovative companies, larger organizations, public administration, et cetera, and as well as to respect the autonomy of the participants. Next slide, please. Challenges, it's complicated, clearly. The idea of federation, it's been used in many cases. It's sometimes, it's appealing because it does respect the autonomy of the participants, but at the same time, to have the real benefits of federation, you need to spend a little bit more work upfront thinking about what you are trying to accomplish, what your shared goals are, what the government's decisions are, and how to do that in an effective way and respect people's voices. So there are some, shall we say, startup costs involved in making an effective federation. In addition, a federation, it might be useful for it to start small, to build around a smaller set of stakeholders, to build that trust, and to expand building on the success within that particular situation. It should also take into account the different sectors. there are different needs in different areas, and we may need to respect those differences. Next slide, please. So this is federation. Moving on to edge. As the discussion has already explored, there's an explosion of data, and there's also a growing belief that this data will be in the edge. And if you work the numbers out, you realize that almost all of the data growth is actually going to happen, if you believe the forecasts, it will happen in the edge. So we need to figure out the right solution for edge infrastructure, because the cloud, the central core, may play a much smaller role in the future. So here's one slide that from our partners IDC and the HCloud projects that talks about the fact that the edge is a challenging concept, a challenging technology, if you will, for the smallest organizations. And the red box down at the bottom highlights the fact that the smaller organizations do not know fully how they're going to embrace the edge. Next slide. And in contrast, telecoms and media are, as an industry, the most advanced in terms of adopting edge computing. And this is, of course, natural. Media is a content distribution network, and they're very familiar with getting their resources close to the consumer. And telecom obviously is an important role in any edge solution, and they're at the forefront of this discussion. Next slide. And extending the discussion I made before, where is the data going to be collected? So you see the three little peaks. At the edge is the green, in the middle is a mix, and the blue is the core. You see already today, this is by 2022, which is not too far away. You see that a large proportion of data is going to be collected. IoT data is going to be analyzed out at the edge, not in the core. So the growing importance. Moving on, please. So what are the challenges for edge infrastructure, and what's a possible role for federation? Clearly, there are many large investments being made in the hardware and the software in the edge, but the solutions, our understanding of the solutions perhaps is not mature enough. There's a lot of variability, they are not standard solutions, they may not be interoperable, so this creates a bit of a barrier for users to have to choose, make a choice amongst the different solutions. Software solutions, particularly those being proposed by the largest cloud providers, are really, at least as they look today, first, they're not interoperable, you have to make a choice again. And the operating principle is in many cases about moving the data rapidly from the edge to the cloud where the data can be processed. So there are modest attempts to do data processing in the edge, out in the field. But this is something that perhaps we need to have better solutions for. It's also a CapEx model. This is not we have not yet seen a transformation in the edge market like we've seen in the computing market, where we've moved from a CapEx to an OpEx model, and the cloud is responsible for that. So what is the opportunity to create a public edge offering, just like we see a public cloud offering? So they're just the beginning, people are just beginning to think about this. Now, we've talked about federation as a solution or an approach in the European cloud ecosystem, so perhaps there's a comparable role that can be played in the edge. Next slide, please. Let's turn to data spaces. So if you think about the two big blocks in the, not only in the EU's strategic views, but also their high impact project has two big red squares that have an arrow between them, and one of them is the data spaces. So what is a data space? It's moving beyond one-to-one data sharing, point-to-point, one company with another company, to a many-to-many capability. And how do we make this possible? Clearly, the models and technologies for data sharing historically do not really expand into this many-to-many environment. And so we are exploring a new space in thinking out how about data spaces will work. This is a challenge also for the existing cloud edge orchestration and data processing, because again, the model has been more focused on a single organization or perhaps specific point-to-point communication. So European Cloud Federation may very well play an important and critical enabling role for creating and enabling data spaces. Next. One challenge that exists is to ensure that we are respecting in all of the different parts of this distributed environment, perhaps a cloud federation, that we are complying with the necessary privacy and security policies of the people who own and are stewards of the data that's being shared. So there's an expectation that the processing by any third party, somebody other than the data owner, must also occur in an appropriately trusted environment. We need to see trusted and verifiable, this is not just I say it's trusted, there must be external or validation of the trust in that environment, must be comparable or appropriate relative to the data owner's own environment. So there's a natural hesitation to share data when the owner is worried that that data will be improperly touched and processed. So that's something we need to solve. It's not just a technical solution, it's also an organizational and a compliance issue. Next slide, please. So cloud computing enabling data spaces. We know it's essential to support them, and the industry needs to figure this out. So we need to provide, as the cloud computing environment, the ecosystem, we need to provide easy to adopt, easy to use solutions that accommodate this dynamic data processing and allows dynamic connections amongst the different ecosystems that allow us to go all the way from that central cloud core out to the edge. So this is another motivation for a more common, shall we say, working agreement amongst the parties that will enable them to work together and to allow these connections to happen rapidly. And again, we need the environments to be trusted, verifiable, so that we are, any data owner, any data steward can continue to be sure that they are satisfying the privacy and security constraints that apply. Next slide, please. I don't know if some of you were participating in a very long set of presentations a few weeks ago by GAIA-X, which had gone from a very promising, exciting announcement in October of last year. And finally, in June of this year, earlier this month, we got quite a lot of detail about how GAIA-X hopes to achieve its objectives. They do propose an approach that leverages the infrastructure in order to support a data ecosystem. So they proposed a model to do this. It's not clear yet what whether they're proposing a federation, a partnership. There's a lot of focus on agreeing to standards. However, at least from the information I have seen, and perhaps I'm missing something, I'm not clear yet whether there's a plan to create a true multi-organizational collaborative organization through the GAIA-X Foundation. There are some obvious European Cloud Federation roles, potential for a European Cloud Federation to play a strong role in supporting this, but I think we need to have a clear focus on the business questions, what the use cases are, what the benefits are. And I think still there's a stronger focus by GAIA-X on technologies and standards and not enough focus on the end users and the actual applications that are going to be needed. But I would be very interested to hear the views of the group here today. Next slide, please. Let's turn to green computing. So clearly there's a strong interest in green. It's part of people's CSR reporting, their ESG reporting. There's, even at the level of corporate reporting, this is a challenge. This transition is challenging for SMEs. Looking at your ICT impacts on your green footprint, your environmental footprint, is very difficult as an individual user. There are very few shall we say, audited reports that indicate that your use of cloud is creating this amount of greenhouse gases, and these choices you're making are better than other choices that you're making. So it's a challenge to make operational decisions in support of your green computing objectives. So the question is how do we create the structures that will allow individual organizations make the right choices to continue to support the sustainability objectives. So if you're running a data center, you can measure that. But if you're using cloud computing, sometimes it's a little hard. Now we can, let's look at the next slide. You know, at the end of the day, this is what we're going to look like. You know, this web page generated this many grams of carbon dioxide. This particular edge computing activity generated this many grams of carbon dioxide, or this device involved this many kilograms of cobalt mining. So there are many aspects of green, of environmental sustainability. And I think this is something that we are still a long way from driving these metrics down to the level of sort of microservices, if you will, to use a term that's very common now. So next slide, please. So there are standards and tools to measure the environmental impact of data centers, but there aren't yet appropriate tools or you know, readily usable tools to measure that an end-to-end environmental impact of your ICT activities. You can look at hosting, you can look at co-location, data centers, etc. But boiling it down to the addendum to your cloud services bill from T-Systems is a little more difficult. We need to incorporate this as a factor in public procurement, as well as in compliance requirements for potential participation in a European Cloud Federation. What are the minimums? Are there some expectations there? And is this a role for the Cloud Federation? And then how can the cloud industry actually work to support EU SMEs in their own work towards a sustainable digital transition? So I think these are important questions which will require some more work. Moving to the next slide, please. So at this point, we'd like to turn, I think we've taken quite a bit of time, more time than we'd planned, but we do want some input from the folks on the call. We have a number of key questions. What is the role and purpose of a cloud federation? What are the key services that this federation could offer? User services? What concrete actions are needed to facilitate the expanded take-up of the edge? What are the building blocks and supports necessary for an EU data space, as is outlined by the Commission? And then finally, what should the cloud industry, how can the cloud industry, what actions can it take to support the green transition that the Commission is advocating? So I'd like all of you to think about these questions, and we'll take them one at a time. And using the process we used before, raising your hands, I look forward to people's comments. I do see one question in the comments, and I'll read it out. This is from Rutger. I don't know where Rutger's from. Perhaps he can add that to the chat. Considering the requirement for a neutral data exchange location between clouds and edge, have you considered the carrier-neutral co-location facilities across Europe? These facilities have been playing a role in interconnecting networks, internet exchanges, and cloud platforms for 20+ years. It's a great thought. So I guess I would ask Rutger, I think it's a great idea. Is there, perhaps he could share with us any of the current initiatives by these roles, carrier-neutral co-location facilities in supporting edge computing. Any comments on that, Rutger? Are you there?
Yes, hello there. It's Rutger ten Hoven.
Hi.
Sorry, I just had to unmute myself for a moment. Yeah, so basically, as mentioned, I think the role that interaction as a carrier-neutral data center facility has played for near to 20 years, has always been interconnecting the various networks, whether international or local, internet exchanges, enabling the cloud on-ramps to the major hyperscale cloud platforms. So if you explore options for interconnecting the various cloud platforms with the edge through different networks, whether international, local, mobile, this currently is all happening in these facilities. So from that perspective, it could be a good option to explore what role exactly we could play in such solutions and what exactly the problem is we're trying to solve.
Okay, thank you, Rutger. Very quickly, is any of this edge to cloud connection going on in those facilities today, or is that something you're thinking about?
No, there's a lot of that going on. That's the core business we are in.
A lot of it. Okay, between the edge. Very good. Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry, can I add something?
Yes, of course, Alexandra.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So that was an important comment. Thank you for that. I just wanted to say that that's already, if you look at the SAFE2 cloud, I would say, action that we have put, and there is the link in the presentation I was doing at the end. The carriers co-location facility will also be, of course, eligible for working on further interconnection across Europe. So just to tell you that. And second, I see your point about the cloud on ramp and the fact that this is already happening, but still the number of cloud on ramp that exist across Europe, they are not so well developed yet when we look at this nowadays. So of course there is a critical role that co-location facility and carrier should have there, but that is not yet fully established. So just wanted to say that.
Just to react to that, could you explain why you feel it's not currently available to a large degree? Because large cloud platforms like AWS, Microsoft, Google, they would have these cloud on and off ramps in the vast majority of EU countries.
Well, so that's exactly what I was going to say, and I think we have also Amazon Web Services here online, so they can also comment. When you look at least at the data available on that, you see that the Southern Europe is at least having no connection on the cloud on ramp in the mapping that they are available, and neither the Eastern countries. So you have some centers that yes exist, but they are not spread across all Europe. And so then when you have some of the data centers that they are basically consolidated also in a few countries, you have also in time of, if I take the example now of even the COVID-19 crisis time, you have also a problem of, you have issue of latency that has been happening when people were trying to connect because they were not close to the data centers. If you are more than 1,200 kilometers from your data center, the services is of a lower quality and you have a higher time to connect. So then the alternative, and that's why it's important, is to have edge computing as well, not alternative, but as complement of data centers as well centrally, because both goes in hand in hand. But then you see that at the moment, this is the capacity that needs to be further developed across Europe, in all parts of Europe. That's the point.
Okay, thank you. That was very helpful. I appreciate that discussion. Perhaps I could draw the group's attention back to that first question. I'm looking forward to further discussion of edge, but perhaps we could discuss the questions about cloud federation, the idea of cloud federation. And I'm wondering if there are people on the call in the webinar today who see cloud federation as solving problems that they are aware of, or are they hoping that the Cloud Federation would be an approach to solve certain challenges that they see in the market today? If there's anyone on the call who can point to some issues that Cloud Federation can help with. Tatiana.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tiziana Ferrari. I'm director of EGI. EGI is a large-scale high-throughput computing and cloud infrastructure for research, and I'd like to bring my thoughts to this discussion on what is the business proposition of a federation and what are opportunities for Europe, at least with the experience that we have been gathering in the research domain. So within AGI, we have been federating hundreds of data centers. This has been very successful, and the main reason of doing federation at infrastructure as a service level has been that these data centers had a common business mission, which for research is supporting large research collaborations for data-intensive science. And this was successful as this allowed member states to invest nationally in data centers and pool these capacities and national investments at European and international beyond Europe level. So there were major advantages in terms of being able to reach the necessary hyperscale in Europe and beyond, but also being able to ensure return of investment locally in the region, in the country. This has been working because these data centers are not competitors in the market. They have essentially the same purpose, which is supporting a common group of research collaborations. I see federation at infrastructure as a service level more challenging in the business sector, where cloud providers are competitors. And we see from a research angle an interest, and this is probably something which is also a driver for business, in being increasingly federated at the data level, where data becomes an integral part of the infrastructure. Maintaining data requires expertise from the data providers. It's typically an expertise which infrastructure providers don't have. It's very expensive to achieve, to maintain, and Europe could define a federation around the data providers, where cloud providers could benefit from essentially being able to reuse and repurpose data in their own cloud environment without having to face the cost of maintaining, curating the data. This is an area which would deserve investigation. We know this has been already done successfully by large cloud providers for some research data, for example, which has a big economical exploitation value. But it's done by sector where there is a lot of business traction. It's expensive, and it's something which is more complicated to achieve for smaller cloud providers in Europe. So federation would be surely beneficial in the research domain and commercial domain if it's considered around data as an integral part of the infrastructure, where the data provider is part of the business model. This is a comment bringing our experience in research, where we see also opportunities from the commercial sector.
Great, thank you very much, Tiziana. So I would like to take one of your comments and again pose this to the cloud providers who are who are attending with us. What are your views about the ability of commercial cloud providers to participate in a cloud federation, either at the infrastructure level or in support of a data federation level? So I'd be interested in views of interest and willingness and feasibility of creating cloud federations, either at the infrastructure level or at the data level amongst the for-profit providers. Okay, nobody is willing to venture some ideas. Let's move on to the services that the federation might offer. Are there any views of the group about specific services that a cloud federation might provide, perhaps in the area of federated data, as Tiziana was suggesting, perhaps in the areas of common services? You know, maybe there are ways for the federated providers to share different activities to improve their cost effectiveness. For example, common threat intelligence mechanisms for security to improve their security strength, while at the same time managing their costs. Okay. Let's turn to the edge again. We've already heard Rutger Terhoeven talking about some specific point where edge connectivity can be improved, can be enabled. Any other thoughts amongst the group about barriers that exist in the edge, whether we need to have common standards, whether there is a need for a public edge OpEx type of business model? In your own businesses, in your own activities, do you see initiatives that are promising to support this greater edge take up?
Well, there I might step in. Well, because I'm working with Threefold that has basically created decentralized cloud infrastructure where small nodes, small cloud capacity can be put really close to the end consumer. And we believe that there might be a way to facilitate edge in a federated cloud setup. I'd even say a decentralized cloud setup. That to me makes even more sense. It's not federated, it's more peer-to-peer. It's decentralized up to a point where everybody owns his own data, basically. But I'd like to explore together with you on how we can explore this.
Okay, so perhaps if you can share your contact information, we can certainly reach out and have a longer conversation. But for the group here today, is this something that you're doing as a pilot or an early venture, or is it something that is available commercially?
Well, it's starting to be available commercially, but of course it's still in a prototype phase, let's say. But it's commercially usable for small for particular workloads, let's say.
Okay, very good. I look forward to learning more. We will reach out to you and ask more questions. So let's talk about data spaces. And in particular, I would ask a quick question about data spaces in connection with GAIA-X. Any perspectives amongst the group about the GAIA-X approach to solving or realizing the data space vision? Perhaps some of you have examined what GAIA-X is doing. Maybe some of you are even involved. So I'd be curious to get, if you will, a pros and cons view of GAIA-X. What can be improved? What should be expanded? And more generally, since no one's picking up that question, what are any of you involved in activities that you believe would support the realization of data spaces? Perhaps you have particular kinds of software technology that allows for secure data sharing. Perhaps you have mechanisms that enable the flow of data or the categorization of data to make it more easily findable. Is there a capability amongst our attendee group that we should be learning more about? Kind of like what Gert was just doing to share his opportunity. Okay. And looking at the green area, I'm pretty sure that some of the folks on the call are from the cloud computing industry. My perception is that there is the code of conduct about the EU in terms of measuring your energy efficiency and reporting this. What are the mechanisms that perhaps you as an any of you individually are providing better tools for your customers to translate the use of your energy efficient facilities into things that the customer can report as part of their own sustainability efforts? Is this something that any of you are engaged in? Okay. Well, those are some of the specific questions that we come up with. I would invite all of you to offer your general comments about the EC strategies that described and our exploration of how they might translate into actions in the areas of federated cloud, edge computing, and green ICT. Any general comments that you can share with us? Tatiana.
It's still me, and this comment that I would like to bring to the discussion also answers the previous question about what are areas for data spaces where more innovation would be useful. And here again, I'm bringing the experience of our European Federation of Research Clouds. The way we are planning to implement the data spaces with a focus on fundamental science is to create data lakes, meaning the ability to have major data centers with data copies that can be mirrored dynamically in a smart manner and computed locally by in smaller cloud infrastructures at national level across Europe. This brings cost savings from a provisioning point of view, as data is maintained and created in one or very few locations across Europe in collaboration with the data providers. And we want to cut on storage costs in the smaller cloud satellite infrastructures where data analysis takes place. This requires speedy connectivity, but also very smart mechanisms of data caching. The level we are trying to do this is exabyte scale to support larger research endeavors that will handle hundreds of petabytes on a monthly basis. So an area where there is still a need of innovation and technical development is having this federated data management mechanisms, which will allow in a federated environment to cut down on cost of data provisioning. And we believe this is an opportunity for business where there are data sets which are very large, which are interesting, for example, in the pharmaceutical industry, or for all the applications around environmental data, where there is a lot of data which is very hard to replicate and maintain on spinning disks locally. Having solutions that would allow that would bring a cost savings and probably also an incentive to cut an operational cost for any cloud provider. This is still an area of large development as far as we know.
Thank you, Tatiana. What Tatiana is describing is particularly important around some of the satellite Earth observation data that's being generated for the European continent and surrounding areas, where obviously the amount of data is huge and it is very difficult to move around. So creating a data space capability around that topic is quite beneficial. The EC has also mentioned a number of other high value data sets that are available that they are going to work to make more broadly accessible. And I'm wondering, some of them relate to public administration, some of them relate to healthcare, some of them relate to mobility. And I'm wondering if anyone here in the group is also looking at some of these high value data sets as business targets, if you will, for your business. Let me, if you could share your own experience in working with this data, as an early data space, it would be quite interesting to our group. Okay, so no particular initiatives in this area. All right. Okay, any questions? Any more questions from the group for example, for Alexandra? There are also some other folks from the commission sitting on the call listening. They may be able to answer some questions. If you want to pose some questions about their strategies, their planned new programs, that would be now would be a good time to ask those questions.
Okay, so sorry again if there is any question. I have just one back, perhaps. It was, I think, the lady from EGI as well, if I am not mistaken, speaking about the different federation of the different data center. And I took the point, of course, of the fact that the different cloud provider might not have the incentive to be willing to federate together. However, the other part we have there is also to think about if it would be also useful to federate any of the other cloud infrastructure that might be owned by whether public entities, or even if you look at financial services, that they are private actors, other private actors that might have interest to pull resources together for data processing. So whether they are banking data, what I was saying, or in the public sector. So I would be grateful to have some thought on that, if that would be an alternative that could be feasible based on the experience you have.
Tiziana speaking again. Yes, this is essentially the scenario that where federation can work. This is where initiatives have their own public cloud, private clouds. I've used the word research cloud, which is essentially a private cloud closed or made available to research communities for non-profit purposes. And yes, my point of view and our experience is exactly that when you have a private cloud that needs to reduce operational costs and share data across institutions or across countries, then federation brings value because simplifies access to the infrastructure, to the data, makes using single sign-on and other mechanisms for discovery simpler for the users. And that's where surely there is a benefit. My overall comment and yes, a reaction to the priorities of the funding programs presented today is that federation has to be taken carefully where there is a strong business case behind, because federation may not be the solution for certain problems. And I have some concerns that federation is the answer for creating a European upper-scale facility. This would be possible where there are alliances across cloud providers to, for example, respond to the need of big industry, big user communities. We see the bigger opportunities at a different level. So platform, software, and data. Data is key in our experience. And also in public administration in a number of collaborations we have.
And this is exactly a point there where you have it can be, as you said, the infrastructure level or at the middleware level or at even the software level. If you look at even other H2020 products that were done on Cloud Federation as well. So it's not that it's just, I would say, we just need to stick to the infrastructure level. I mean, we need to put exactly what you say where it makes sense as business case to have, if the federation is making sense at the level that is the most appropriate. And that might not be exactly the same for different type of entity either. So that's, that is fully clear for us. And that's why when we look at the different even funding program, we are not mandating any type, for example, that's why it's written public and private users federation of their infrastructure, but it's not a specific one that we want them to do it, and that even federation can be virtual, what we call, or functional, or it can be as physical. So that's not something that we should and we will mandate to be done under this funding program. So I think that's very clear to us. It will depend on the business case and on the reality of the IT system that they are in place as well. So that's clear. For me, what would be also interesting is, and maybe it's not in this call, but is aside from this call, if you have any data point, or I would say even efficiency gain that you could share in terms of the different federations that were done. To see the value proposition behind that in terms of economic rationale, that would be appreciated.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you, Tiziana. We're almost out of time, so this is a final opportunity for any last questions, either of us, of our attendees from the Commission, or ideas and feedback about what you've heard today. Okay, if there's nothing else, I think we should bring this to a close. I know that everybody loves spending time on Zoom calls. So we're going to adjourn the meeting. I appreciate everyone's attention. I would encourage you once again to please turn to our survey that Martel has arranged, and we posted the link in the chat. Maybe Verena can add this again to the chat for everyone, and it's in the presentation. So that is a mechanism for each of you to provide more specific and perhaps private answers to some of the important questions that we're trying to answer on behalf of the community for the Commission. So I thank you. I look forward to seeing your survey answers and to communicating with some of you separately outside of this webinar. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your days and your evening. Take care.